All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Perspective Matters, this week in behavioral healthcare. I'm your host, Glenn Hadley, and I want to thank you guys for joining us today. I hope you're having a fantastic week, and in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, I'd like to share a quote from him that was shared with me on Monday by a good friend of mine. And this passage was taken from his speech at the Oberlin College commencements in 1965. And here's what Dr. King said. He said, "All I'm saying is simply this, that all mankind is tied together, all life is interrelated, and we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of identity. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what I ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality." And I think that's so important with the world and what's going on today, that we understand that we really are all connected. And I just wanted to share that, and considering Martin Luther King Day being on Monday. So thank you for that. And we'll go ahead and get rocking and rolling today. So for those of you guys that are new to the show, on the show, we address topics in behavioral healthcare that range from clinical, operational, marketing, business development, and public policy. And our goal is to be a resource for the field and a platform to bring mentors to those out there on the front lines. I would like to take a moment and thank our sponsors, Dreamscape Marketing. They really allow us to do the show. If you are looking for anything in the behavioral healthcare space as it relates to marketing, please go to Dreamscape Marketing and check those guys out, and also thank them for allowing us to kind of be here and to do this deal. So without them, this isn't possible. All right, so let's get into the show, and I want to introduce our guest today. My guest is Lauren Sisler, and Lauren is a multinational award-winning sports broadcaster working with ESPN, SEC Network, and AL.com. Her journey was not always full of victories and celebrations. In 2003, as a freshman at Rutgers University, tragedy struck Lauren's world when she unexpectedly lost both of her parents within hours of each other to their concealed battle with addiction. Through her grief and despair, Lauren found the courage to continue moving forward and find success. Lauren now shares her story across the country in hopes of spreading awareness while breaking down the barriers that stand in the way of us living our best life. As she delivers a powerful message of hope and resilience through her storytelling, Lauren creates an authentic connection with her audience, leaving them empowered and inspired. And so with that, I'm really excited to have Lauren join us today. Welcome, Lauren. Thanks for being on the show.
Hi, thank you. So great to be on here. I love you're sitting beside your cozy fireplace. It's not quite as cold here in Birmingham, Alabama. That's where I reside. And, we get at least, 9-10 months out of the year where it's fairly warm, at least decent weather. So not as cold here, but I do have my sweater on. So it is sweater weather.
Absolutely. So, I'm a Southern Louisiana boy, right? But I'm up here in Boise, Idaho, and I just who knew that a guy from the South would love the winter so much? But it is just gorgeous up here, just beautiful.
It is absolutely gorgeous. And I must say, my first trip to Boise was last year. I had the honor of covering 3 Boise State games for ESPN on the sideline. So I got to experience the Smurf turf in all of its glory. Yes. It was amazing. Of course, now Boise State fans. Brian Harsin, obviously now in Auburn, so he's right up the road from me now here in this great state of Alabama. So I guess we just, have to share the love a little bit.
Yeah, I think it opens up an opportunity here, but I don't know how sorely missed he'll be. We'll see. But it's good for Auburn fans, right? Good for Auburn.
That's right.
So,
absolutely.
Like before we get started, like what is it like being a Rutgers alum on an SEC sideline? Because I can imagine, being down there quite a bit. You probably take a good ribbing from some of your coworkers, right?
Well, I have to be honest with you. First and foremost, I am in the state of Alabama, as I mentioned, and there's this color that you see a lot that is categorized as crimson. But I like to make sure everyone knows when I wear red, it is scarlet for the Scarlet Knights. So I have to make sure I correct people on that. It's a little shade darker crimson. Nevertheless, I will tell you, I think in some ways it's probably a good thing that I didn't go to an SEC school not named Alabama or Auburn living here, because it's rare. I have like Rutgers gymnastics alumni on my license plate or whatever. And it's so rare. People are like, Rutgers, like, and it's rare. You never see like a Rutgers tag floating around. So I will say that in some ways it's probably a good thing, because then when people always want to, you're for this team, you're for that team or whatever. And I'm always like, no, Scarlet Knights all the way. Like, I don't have a dog in the fight. So in many ways, especially that Rutgers has not necessarily been very successful as of late, nothing to worry about. But what I do like to remind people, yes, I know Nick Saban got his seventh national championship. I want to remind people though that Rutgers invented college football. 1869, we played the first college football game. So for those of you who say, Rutgers, well, we invented it. So got you there.
So you were the first. You know what? I think that's something you can hold over everybody from now on. I love that.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I have Alabama fans that are like, well, we perfected it. And I'm like, hey, we got to start somewhere.
Absolutely. So let me ask you a little bit about that, usually on the show, I ask our guests how they got started in the field, but in your case, it's like, how did you get started on the field? Like how did you get into broadcasting and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. I grew up wanting to be a sports doctor. So sports was always on my radar. Sports was in my household. It was Saturdays and Sundays. We were always huddled up by the TV watching college football, NFL. Was a big NASCAR girl, loved NASCAR. My brother was on a pit crew around the local track. I mean, I was always a big avid sports fan along with my parents and my family. And so just kind of being around it, but really sports medicine was kind of the direction I wanted to go, because as a former gymnast, which people are always shocked by, because, oh, by the way, I'm 5'9". I'm sitting down right now. You can't tell, but there's not too many 5'9" gymnasts in this world. Unfortunately, I missed the mark a little bit on the growth spurt, but nevertheless, I had always had aspirations of, being injured, and everything that I went through in gymnastics is helping other athletes to rehabilitate and get back out on the field in their respective sports. So that was sort of a dream of mine, more of a childhood dream. And then as I kind of grew and matured, and as you mentioned in my introduction, life happens, tragedy happens, and it really forced me to kind of step back and reevaluate myself and reevaluate where I was in life and reevaluate my passions, because childhood dreams aren't always the same as adult dreams. And I tell this to people all the time. Your mind is going to switch directions a million times. And I think a lot of people think when I go to school, like, this is what I'm going to do. And then you're going to find 5 years, your 5-year plan and your 10-year plan, like, it changes. And as you know, it can change drastically, but it's not always a bad thing. And I'm so thankful that it sort of led me to this, because I do feel really what connected me to sports broadcasting is connection, my ability to connect with people. And I think that's where I found my love and my passion, is knowing that I can connect with people and relate to them with sports, but also in storytelling. And that's something I just love so much about my job, is the opportunity to tell stories of the coaches, the fans, the athletes, the community, and to provide that sort of glimmer of hope, that ray of light, and just that, that positive story and narrative that gets people up in the morning, that gets them, out of bed and gives them something to root for.
Absolutely. And so, you have the unique gift of not only being able to tell that story about the on-field stuff, but the off-field stuff as well. And we're going to get into that. But I do got to ask you, before we move away from this, what's the craziest thing that you've ever experienced, like broadcasting from the sidelines or around college sports?
That is such a great question. I have had many great experiences. I will tell you, being on the sidelines for the 2013 Iron Bowl is one that most people, even if you're not an Alabama or Auburn fan, will remember that game when the field goal fell short. Chris Davis fielded it, ran 100 plus yards down the sideline, punched it in, end zone, and there you go. Auburn beats Alabama. Ohio State loses in the Big Ten championship. Auburn goes to the national championship. It was crazy. It was chaos. It was so much fun. What's so crazy about that, though, is I have never in my life felt so terrified for my life, because, oh, by the way, we had to storm onto the field with the coaches and the players and the chaos of all the fans flooding in and pouring into the field. My goal and my job was to go out there and get as many interviews as I possibly could in that massive chaos. Well, here's the thing. When you're a journalist and you have a camera in your hands, people flock to you. Fans flock to you. They're like, oh, put me on TV. Well, that was terrifying because there were so many people. I was thinking literally in my head, I was seeing the headlines reading like, reporter dies in sea of fans, and when storms, fans storm the field. So that was a pretty interesting time in my life. And a game that I will of course remember, but there's just so many great stories and so many great things that happen. And really it's the people and it's the fans and the athletes and the heart and dedication that goes into it that makes you say, man, like I'm lucky to be in this position to be able to do this.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the things that we do love about sports, and it draws us all in and all together. And I can only picture you running around out there dodging fans as they're storming the field trying to grab the camera. I love that. Yeah.
Oh yes.
Can you imagine? So I want to switch gears a bit, and I want to ask you, like, I know that you've done a lot of amazing work as an advocate for behavioral healthcare services. You're very involved in spreading the word about the need for it, specifically substance use treatment and the services around that. So I want to ask you, what drives you to do that work and advocate for increased care for those suffering from substance abuse disorder?
Well, you touched on it in the introduction. Just to give a little backstory. So, growing up, I think that, you're in this sort of bubble in some ways. I kind of knew what addiction was, sort of, kind of, you do the DARE classes, you learn about it, you hear about it. And, my dad did struggle with alcoholism growing up, but it was something that was really kind of not talked about. It was sort of quiet. It was silenced. He would, maybe relapse and then start, I would hear him and my mom talking about, okay, I got to go back to my AA meetings. And then that was it. So it almost just seemed like just a little blip on the radar. And I never understood it for the magnitude of what it was. I never understood it as a disease. I never understood it as something that consumed my father, and really, in many ways, probably potentially led to the next step in he and my mom's addiction with prescription drugs. Both of them were experiencing chronic pain, went to a pain management doctor in Roanoke, Virginia. That's where I was raised. And this was when pain management was still very new, late 90s, early 2000s. And, they were dealing with their pain. My dad had chronic back pain. He also suffered from some depression that, I think he experienced from some of his service in the military. My mom also, the depression, you're in a lot of pain. She had multiple surgeries over the course of several years. And it was just sort of kind of fueling this addiction. But I didn't see it that way. And I don't know that they saw it that way, at least early on, because they were going to this pain management doctor. They were being told, this is going to fix you. This is going to heal you. This is going to make you feel better. But at the end of the day, it ultimately led them down this path of addiction. And, I go back and actually look through some of the paperwork and some of the files that my mom kept. She was very, very detailed about everything. And when she was filing for disability, she had to kind of journal things. And she was so by the book. Like this morning I woke up, I did exactly what my doctor said, take this, do this, take this, do this. And there was almost like a level of naivety there that she didn't realize what this was going to lead to. And ultimately, as you mentioned, when I was a freshman in college, I got the phone call from my father that my mom had passed away. It was the middle of the night. I just talked to them hours before that, before I went to bed. And when I got that call, I had no idea that my mom died of a prescription drug overdose. No idea. And my dad just said, get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. And unfortunately, he never did show up that day. And he too overdosed from fentanyl. That was the pain patch that both of my mom was prescribed the pain patch. But, I think at some point my parents were sharing some of their prescription drugs, and ultimately sort of led to, the end result there. So, for months, we really as a family didn't know what ultimately took their lives. I think there was, some ideas, or at least some thoughts about it. But for me as an 18-year-old, I did everything I could to run away from reality. I did not want to acknowledge the truth. I didn't want to accept the truth. So people would ask me, well, what happened to your parents? And I would say, well, my mom died of respiratory failure and my dad died of a heart attack. Because the word respiratory failure, those two words, that sounds a lot better than overdose. my dad dying of a heart attack sounds a lot better than respiratory failure because of an overdose. And so, I built this story up in my head for so many years that it got to the point where I actually believed it. And I was just running from reality of the truth of what had happened to them because I was so ashamed of it. I was so attached to the shame that I couldn't acknowledge the truth. And so what I realized over the course of time, I was very thankful to have a lot of support from family and friends, and my auntie Linda, who is my mom's sister, who started to kind of break those walls down. And she said, Lauren, look, your parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they live their lives. And you have an opportunity to shine a light on this thing. You have an opportunity to live out their legacy and continue their legacy through what you do every day. And so that's when I started to realize, wow, I don't need to live in shame. I don't need to be shackled to this shame. And that's where I started to take ownership of what had happened, acknowledge what had happened, and then voice what had happened, share what had happened in an effort to break down the stigma and to let people know, like, this thing is real, this thing exists, and it affects so many people. I mean, this thing affects everyone. Everyone is dealing with this in some capacity. And that was beyond me, because I just could not believe, growing up and what I believed to be that picture perfect middle-class family, all-American family, that could be my parents. That could be me. And it was a tough road, but I am so thankful to be on the other side of it, sitting here right now, talking to everyone, sharing my story, and being able to say, hey, it's okay.
Yeah, there are so many stories just like this across the country where for years doctors were prescribing medication based on what they were being told, that this is how you treat pain. Like, if you have someone comes in that's experiencing this, you prescribe this medication for them. This is the treatment for it. And it was just this whole level of misinformation around it that so many people fell into. And then the fallout from it, I think, is what we're walking through now with the opioid epidemic, and seeing so many stories like this. It's heartbreaking to see, because it really could have been avoided on the front end. And that's a whole other interview we could get into about that, the whole start of this thing. But what I wanted to ask for you, when you made that shift and that change from being from this happened to me to this is something that I can walk through and do something about. I know that you had people in your life that came and talked with you. Who were some of those people, not only your family members, but also mentors, people that came in and shared their experience with you that helped you through this?
Yeah, I can think of so many people along the way. And I'll start, I mentioned my auntie Linda, my uncle Mike. Really, I was 18. So I was not in need of a legal guardian per se, but I was still a kid. I didn't even know how to write a check. My parents were always, focus on your schoolwork, focus on your gymnastics, we'll take care of the rest. So they, of course, were an integral part in really helping me sort of redefine my pathway to success and sort of redefine my way into becoming an adult. I had to learn to grow up really quick. Another thing I would point to is I went back to Rutgers 2 weeks after my parents died. 2 weeks. I gave myself 2 weeks. Wow. And that was partially because my aunt and uncle came to me and said, look, you have a commitment to yourself, your university, your teammates and coaches. You got to go back. There's nothing here for you back at home where, you're going to sit and grieve this. You got to keep moving forward. You've got to put one foot in front of the other. And I think that was the best decision. I go back to Rutgers, and I mean, it was a roller coaster ride. And of course, as I said, I was doing pre-medicine. I was trying to figure out my life. It was after about a year of that up and down, my grades were suffering. I mean, I was an AB honor roll student. Next thing you know, I'm making C's and D's. Like, what is happening here? But I will tell you, through that process, having the commitment from my coaches and my teammates and really my academic advisors and all the resources I had surrounding me was tremendous. And it wasn't because they said, we're just going to let her pass. Early on, there was, I wrote a paper instead of taking a test. There were some things like that. But really, my coaches said to me, Lauren, like, we're not going to let you fail, but you have to get up. You have to stand up and take that first step. We're here to help you, but we can't do it for you. And so there was a lot of tough love in there. And I think that's one piece of advice. And one thing I would say is that, I think sometimes that tough love thing like scares people off. But for me, it was tremendous because I knew that I was loved and I knew I was supported. And now looking back, I realized that, instead of them standing there waving the white flag with me, they said, that's not even an option. They didn't give me that option. So I would say, a lot of credit goes to those people who really stood in the gap and ultimately, helped me to see, get off the pity pot, life goes on. You have to keep moving forward. And so that was a big testament to just the people I was surrounded with and who I'm so thankful that I had in my life at that time. But coming off of that, when I moved here to Birmingham, Alabama, at this point, I hadn't really been doing a lot of advocacy work. I was starting to share my story, but more in small groups with friends. It took me 7 years to actually share my story. My best friend didn't even know for 7 years how my parents died. And so as I started sharing their story, then I realized, okay, maybe I can share this with more people and outside of my, safety net, outside of my comfort zone. And some people that I can think of that really kind of helped me to get there. A good close friend of mine, Danny Malloy and Haley Malloy, were two people that really sort of guided me in that, because these are two people that also were in addiction and are now in recovery and have used their story and their platform and their faith to really show people and shine a light on this thing. And it's so amazing because what they were able to open my eyes to, I then started kind of mirroring some of those things and realizing like, it's okay. And years after I've shared my story with somebody, I hear back from them and say, hey, you gave me permission to share my story. I had never shared my story with somebody. And I'm like, wow, like this is amazing. And so just having that network of people that have been in it, and then even getting to doing some mentoring. I had the opportunity to do some mentoring at the Foundry, which is here locally in Birmingham. And it's a 12-month program that is a faith-based program that essentially helps people get off the streets and get their lives back. And I was able to mentor some young women there. And I'll never forget, I was so fortunate because the girl I mentored, whom I actually was communicating with on social media not too long ago, she has a tremendous success story. So I was very fortunate because I got to be part of that from the very beginning. And I'll just never forget the experiences she shared with me and really the insight that she gave me also into my parents. And, I can't ever go back and know what my parents were thinking, know what they were going through during that time. But I feel like I've gotten some insight from people that have been in the addiction world, have lived it, have experienced it, have known what it's like to look at something and say, I have to choose if I'm going to take this today or not. I have to choose whether or not I'm going to pick up that drink or not, and make that choice based on how I'm feeling and how it is engulfing someone. And it's just amazing to be able to hear those stories and really be able to connect with people like you, Glenn, people that are out here trying to make a difference, trying to bring perspective to things, right? Perspective matters. That's why we're here. It's truly, it takes a village of people, and we're all in this together, arm in arm. And I think that the more that we can bring, a light to it, the more that we can hopefully shatter the stigma and also make the necessary changes to hopefully, diminish this epidemic that we're in the middle of.
What 100%. A big part of why we do the show and also just in the field of substance use treatment that we're here is to break that stigma, right? That this is not it's not a moral failing in people, that this is really a chronic disease that needs treatment, that needs to be treated just like any other chronic disease out there. And I'm curious because you've spent a good bit of your professional career in the limelight, out in the public eye, and having to deal with this this experience that quite honestly, not many people talk about openly. Not many people say it's okay to have this experience. And like you said, you couldn't even share it for 7 years, right? I mean, like that's a long time to hold on to something. So what was that experience like when you finally were able to share it? What were some of the feedback that you got being in the public limelight and sharing your personal experience?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, as I was kind of entering into that phase of sharing their story, there were fears. There were so many fears of like how I was going to be judged. What were people going to think? Are people going to think lesser of me? As you said, the character aspect of it, the character flaw. It's a character flaw to be an addict. And, my fear was, am I going to be chosen and or selected for a particular job? But if people found out my background, would people look at me differently, look at my family differently, think that maybe I'm not qualified, maybe my history and background could potentially lead me down the same path, right? So all these things are going through my head, but I said, I've got to do this with courage. I've got to take that leap of faith, and I did. And honestly, my brother and I, my older brother Alum, we were really embraced in that process. And there were a lot of people, my friends' parents and my parents' friends and their colleagues really had no clue what had happened. And I think that that's the thing. People, you lose someone, and we're as a family left to pick up the pieces, and then everyone on the outside, they just move on with their life, right? But I think there was always within a lot of people that were close with my parents, their colleagues and friends and my coaches and just people that were really close to them, always wanted to know and felt like they never got that closure. They never really got that closure as to what happened to them. And so I think in many ways, it was so freeing for people to know what had happened to my parents. But what's even more amazing is nothing changed about how they viewed my parents as people. And in all honesty, the response was so amazing. People embraced my brother and me even more and said, I'm so thankful to know the truth. I'm so thankful. I feel like I have some sort of peace. And now I can have that conversation. I can be more open and have the courage to have that conversation with someone else. And, I wish we could have done something to help your parents, but now we can do something to help someone else in need that's going through this. And so I really think that that's where things took a turn in a positive way. And I'm just so thankful. The truth will absolutely set you free. It's amazing, what it has done. And there's just the weight that is lifted off my shoulders. And I always just say, those shackles of shame have just been released. And it's truly amazing.
Well, and there's two parts of it. One, like you become freer to share that experience, and the experience you're sharing is so helpful. Right? It's like you actually can normalize it and say it's okay. Like this does happen to anyone, but then also share that it's okay to overcome it too. You don't have to be a victim of it as well. I do want to ask you as a family member and someone that walked through this like you have, was there ever like an experience that you went through that you weren't expecting, that came up and you were like, wow, it came out of left field, that you'd like to share with other family members? Because I do believe as we come together as a community, we offer each other's experience up to where maybe like the person that I'm talking to doesn't necessarily have to have the same experience that I had. They can learn from my experience. So what was something that you went through that maybe you'd want to share with other family members?
Well, first of all, it goes back to when I finally did start sharing. I was very, very surprised at how the response was. I was very surprised at, how people, of course, poured into us as a family and poured into me and just, wanted to do anything they could to help. But also, I think the one thing that I look back on when I think about, where I was in my life as a teenager, I never participated in a lot of those things. I never drank. I never did drugs. It was a choice I made. I was a gymnast. I was devoted to my sport. So I think there were a lot of things that kind of kept me from going in that direction. And I swear to you, I made that decision when I was 15. I never deterred from it. Even when I went back to Rutgers and, probably could have gone down some crazy path. I stayed away from it. And that was, having the strength to do that. I think sometimes I maybe undersell the strength that I had to do that, or at least the whereabouts. But one thing I look back on too is really the lack of education that I had. Not knowing, I thought I knew everything. I thought I was privy to things. I never felt sheltered as a kid. I never felt that I was sheltered from things. My parents were always pretty open about sort of their experiences and what they did. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone does crazy things, right? And it was always sort of like, we did this, don't you dare go out and do that kind of thing. But I never felt sheltered from it. But when I look at how much and how little I actually knew at the time, that's one thing I would say that surprised me, is that I actually knew very little, if anything at all. And looking back at the signs and some of the things that my parents might have been going through, I now see things that I'm like, oh, like now I see it, just some of the arguments. And, my dad would fall asleep at the drop of a hat, and, we'd be watching a movie and he could never make it more than 10 minutes into a movie. And I'm like, what is going on? He's just probably tired from work. But little did I know that, he was medicating and he was taking these drugs that were helping to, suppress the pain, but also suppressing his ability to really function and to, sort of live, a normal life, I guess. So, that would probably be the biggest thing I would say, is just the education aspect. Even if anybody that's watching this thinks that they don't have anything, are not connected to addiction or not connected to behavioral health, mental health in any way, shape, or form, I'm here to tell you, you are so wrong. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a loving way, that everyone's attached to it. Everyone is impacted by it. And I think education is so key. And I think that's something I would encourage people is, even if you think that you know a lot, or even if you think that it's not something that affects you or your family, educate yourself, because I can guarantee you, you are going to come across someone, cross paths with someone that is potentially struggling in silence and just waiting for permission to cry out for help. And you could be that person that unlocks that, and so I think that it's so important. So, that would probably be something that I didn't expect or really see until I, got to a further place in my healing process, and really, this process of really understanding what this addiction was.
Yeah, we had a speaker on earlier, actually it was last year, at an event that talked about some of the numbers in the United States, that there's over 50 million people that have they like disordered drinking or disordered use, and so to say that we're not all personally affected by it somehow, I think it's just kind of burying our head in the sand. So yes, definitely education. I can't preach that enough. So let's get into that side of it just a little bit and move into that. So what are some of the things that you're a part of today to help increase awareness and education for family members or for those that are struggling with substance use disorder?
Yeah, so, things kind of started, as I mentioned, here in Alabama. I became involved with the Addiction Prevention Coalition, which is a nonprofit here that really focuses on, sorry, I got a little tickle in my throat. Hold on one sec. Excuse me, y'all. This is what happens. This is like live TV, right? Nothing you can do about it.
Nope.
I've always wondered if I'm like ever going to sneeze on television. Anyways, that's always something like I've been terrified of, because my sneeze is really loud and it would be really embarrassing. Nevertheless, the Addiction Prevention Coalition here in Birmingham, we focus here mostly in Central Alabama, going into the school systems, doing peer-to-peer counseling, peer-to-peer mentoring, about drug awareness, about drug addiction, also mental health issues, bullying, all those things across the board that I think are so important and are part of our culture today. The stigmas that are involved, social media. There's so many things that our younger generation is being faced with that me, and you probably never had to deal with, never had to face back when we were, teenagers and young adults. And so that's one thing that I do is work with them and prevention efforts. And then obviously educational efforts throughout the community, really educating people. And that's kind of led me to this next project that I'm excited about coming up on February 1st. So we've been working on this, kind of been in the works for a couple of years. We had a vision. I mentioned Danny Malloy. We had a vision. He used to work with the Addiction Prevention Coalition, and we had this vision to do a documentary. Everyone keeps saying like, you need to do something with this. You need to write a book. You need to do a documentary, all these things. And it's like, okay, well, where do I even start? And so we had this vision to do this documentary. And, it was one of those things where we kind of started on it, and then, things happen and life happens, and, it gets put on the table for a little while, and then we pick it back up. And, I had so many people saying, we want to see this happen. We want to make this happen. What can we do to support you? And so my good friend and mentor, really pushed for it and just said, hey, I'm here to support you. Let's get this thing done. So I just had so much encouragement along the way. And so we finally finished shooting it. And, it's considered a short documentary. It's about 20 minutes, and we're premiering it on February 1st. And so really the goal of this series, we hope this is one of many, is to use my story to start the conversation, to destigmatize addiction, and then to take that another step and have that conversation. What are we looking for? Prevention efforts, signs and symptoms, the importance of having those conversations, especially how do you have those conversations, with people that, your kids that, you think are perfect and that aren't experiencing this stuff at school and aren't seeing these things. It's better to get in front of it, better to prepare for it. And I've even heard coaches talk about this time and time again, and it really resonates with me. I think a lot of times we're real quick to start to attack a problem once it's become a problem, but why not start having the conversation before it becomes a problem?
That's so key. Like we oftentimes run into this deal where, and I've said this over and over again, that we treat a chronic condition acutely. And we're going back and seeing, oh, there's the symptom. Let's just treat the symptom when there's no need to, right? Like, this is a chronic condition, and we have all of these services available out there, right? We have all of these behavioral health care resources that are designed to treat substance use disorder and other behavioral health care problems. But I'm sure, like you, I whenever I got into this deal, I had no idea that this whole world of services existed before I absolutely needed it. No one came up to me and said, hey, Glenn, guess what? There's this whole list of resources and people out there that are willing to help if you ever have this, right? It was more like, my hair's on fire. Okay. Like, I really need help now. What do I do? Right.
Right. Well, yeah, absolutely. That, okay, you've got a fever or you've broken a bone. Like, okay, I know I got to go to the doctor. I got to go to the orthopedic, all these things that you think about, like, okay, the resources are there if I need it. But when it comes to mental health and obviously behavioral health and addiction, it's a totally different world. And I think that that's where, it's so important for us to get ahead of this thing. And that's really the purpose of this documentary that we've labeled Beyond the Shadows. And of course, the overlying theme we're calling Beyond the Sidelines, because we want people to get off the sidelines and get in the game and help us to be part of this mission. Whether you have a loved one or you yourself, the individual, has experienced it, or you just want to help with this, because we have seen such an increase. We talked about this, Glenn, you and I, on the phone, couple weeks ago before we were preparing for this. It's interesting when you think about COVID-19 and obviously everything that has come with it. There's been, a lot of issues that have been, a byproduct of this pandemic. The pandemic itself has been ravaging. It has been devastating. But on top of that, there's devastation upon devastation because of the isolation, because of, the health issues, the people that are dealing with this. COVID-19 has attacked our recovery community and our addiction community perhaps harder than ever because of, the effects of, this virus. But then we talked about the stigmatization of it. This has been around 9-10 months, and my goodness, like, there's such a stigma around it that, oh my gosh, if you have COVID, like, stay away, you're a leper, like, I can't hang out with you for the next 6 months. Oh my goodness. Like, can you imagine? I mean, you can't imagine because you've been there. The stigmatization that comes with things that society puts on things. Like, this thing's only been around 9-10 months. Well, I guess we're coming up on a year, which is crazy. But think about that. Addiction's been around for so many years. And, it's had time to build up all this momentum into that stigmatization. Look how quickly we as a society stigmatize COVID-19 like that.
Yep. Absolutely. There's this innate fear whenever something is different and we can't understand it, or it interacts with us in a way that we wouldn't like. And that's one of the troubles or issues we have in addiction, is that it shows up in a way that people don't like. We make the analogy all the time around cancer patients, and that whenever someone has that cancer diagnosis, it's very clear. Everybody circles around them. Let's help. Like, what can we do to help get through this? And we're going to make it. But whenever someone shows up with substance use disorder, a lot of times it's a very different reaction. And we can change that. We can help to change that response to it and help treat this person like they are as a sick person instead of someone that's making a decision to act this way. Let me ask you this: how can we see the documentary? Like, how do we get access to that? Because I want our audience to come show up and check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So great question. The best place to go is we have a landing page on my website, laurensisler.com /sidelines. And basically there you can click register for the event. Tickets are free. So it's just through Eventbrite. It'll be broadcast live on Facebook. And then of course, we'll be bringing some of that material back to the landing page on demand so that you can watch that afterwards as well. But we really want to encourage people to show up 7 p.m. Central Time. What time zone are you in out there in Boise? I even forget. Are you Mountain Time?
I'm Mountain Time out here. Yep. I'm Mountain.
Yes. So it's always trying to keep that straight. So 7 p.m. Central Time, we'll go live. And so you'll get those notifications through Eventbrite if you register there. And, we just want to have a good turnout. We want people to show up. I know people are getting Zoom fatigue. I know people are getting virtual fatigue, but we're so hopeful and so excited about this because, there is a story behind this and there's a call to action. And so that is our goal. Alongside my documentary, like I said, 20 minutes, we're going to have a panel discussion with, a couple people. My good friend, Jim Dunaway, who's a local radio host here in Birmingham, will be moderating. And then the medical director of the NBA, the National Basketball Association Player Assistance and Anti-Drug Program, will also be joining us. We're lucky to have him on the board of directors here at the Addiction Prevention Coalition in Birmingham. He obviously travels around, works closely with the NBA and those players to help with substance use, substance abuse, and really helping them to tackle that problem within the NBA, and having him there to really share his insight and just, what he sees day to day on the front lines and what he's dealing with and really how we get in front of this thing. How do we attack it? And how do we call everyone in to do something about it? We can have the conversation all day long, but we've got to do something about it. So that'll be February 1st. And then we're hoping to continue the conversation with, some, various events after that. And, hopefully very soon we'll get to do some in-person events. Hopefully. I'm hopeful.
I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to that. And I just really appreciate the work that you're doing. We have these conversations and continue to talk about it and break the stigma. But what it really boils down to is that the more that we can put this front and center out there, whenever each individual in their life, whenever somebody approaches them and says, I need help, the more times we can have this conversation, whenever that conversation takes place, they'll know where to send them, right? They'll know where to go, what resources are available, instead of like, when someone approaches it and says, I need help there, I don't know what to do. At least hopefully, as we continue to move forward, we can give them an answer. So let me ask you this before we wrap it up today. Is there anything else you'd like to leave for our audience today that maybe we didn't get a chance to touch on? Anything you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, well, one thing I will say, and this has kind of become my mantra in life in recent years, I always tell people, fall in love with your story. And that to me is so important because I think that we all are faced with challenges, and it doesn't just have to be addiction. It doesn't have to be mental health. There are so many things people are going through. Everyone has a story. And honestly, I didn't see that until I became more forthcoming with my story. And it really took me getting into the sports world and starting to be a storyteller and realizing like I have this opportunity to impact the lives of others through the stories I'm telling. But people are coming to me and trusting in me to tell their story, to be a voice and a platform for them. And I don't even have a voice for myself because I was so ashamed of it. And so that's what I've come to realize. And really my mission and goal is to share that with people. Fall in love with your story, fall in love with who you are and what has gotten you here, your shortcomings, your mistakes, the good, the bad, the ugly. Because guess what? None of us are perfect. None of us are exempt from life's difficult circumstances. And that is my goal. One thing I really hope to do, and this is something that's in the early stages, in the early works of developing a scholarship fund, building a scholarship fund for students who are looking to get a further education, that feel perhaps maybe they are restricted by their circumstances, whether it's loved ones, their caretakers, whomever it may be, that might be in active addiction or might have lost their lives to addiction or might be incarcerated because of drug dealing and or addiction. I want kids to know, I want our younger generation to know they don't have to be a product of those circumstances. I want everyone to know they don't have to be a product of their circumstances. Stop where you are right now. Whatever path you're on, you can go a different direction. You don't have to be shackled to your circumstances and the things that came before you. And you don't have to be shackled to those mistakes and to the things that we all make mistakes. We all do things. We're all learning. We're all growing. We're all trying to figure this thing out called life. Right. And so I just want to, use this as an opportunity. And I'm hoping that one day I can build that scholarship fund in my parents' name and honor to be able to help kids to see that. And it's not just saying, hey, I'm going to help fund this and get you to school. It's being able to teach them and show them that they can achieve great success no matter where they come from. And that's really been my goal. And so, fall in love with your story, own it, embrace it, be who you are, and, share it with the world, because you never know who you can impact and who you can help in that process. And I'm telling you, you will open doors that you never thought possible.
Yeah. Boy, thank you. From one storyteller to another, I just keep sharing it. Keep sharing that story. Keep telling people, because it's very powerful. Lorna, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience. And I know that if you're watching out there and you want more information, you can go to LaurenSisler.com and get plenty of information on what Lauren's working on. But God, thank you for coming on and just being open and vulnerable and sharing your experience. I know that sometimes it is a challenge when you're in the public limelight and still being able to openly and authentically share. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Glenn. I appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing. And thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate all the love and support. It means a lot.
Right on. So before we close today, I just want to thank our sponsors, Dreamscape Marketing. Once again, go to their website, check them out. Thank them for allowing us to do the show. Next week, we're going to have Debbie Thomas on the show. She is the CEO of the Walker Center and the president of the Women's CEO Global Alliance. So I'm really looking forward to spending some time with Debbie. I hope that you'll join us for that. Remember, we do this show every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. And you can find us on all our social media channels. Now, as we close today, I'm really inspired by Lauren's story and hopeful about our future. The more that we can educate ourselves and the public about behavioral healthcare issues, and more importantly, the treatments for these issues, the better equipped we're going to be when a member of our own family reaches out. When they reach out and ask us, we'll be ready. And in that moment, when they do ask for help, remember that perspective does matter. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Hope you all have a great week.